Welcome to my field of dreams. It reaches far and wide. To you it might seem nothing much, but I stand here with pride. If you build it, they will come.
Hi, I'm Nemo James, singer, songwriter, and author, and I'd like to welcome you once again to my podcast, Nemo James Travel Diaries. This podcast is ad-free, but I hope you will forgive me for including short excerpts of some of my songs. If you would like to hear more of the songs I include, you will find a link to them in the show notes. If you enjoy this podcast, please click the subscribe button and share it with your friends. It will mean a lot to me. On this episode, we will be traveling to India, New Delhi, Taj Mahal and Jaipur. 4th of January 2018. Having travelled around Sri Lanka last year, sometimes referred to as India for beginners, we thought we would try the real thing this year. I had read about the chaos and bureaucracy in India and got my first taste when I tried to book a flight. The best deal was with Jet Airways, which was India's second biggest carrier, and what a performance that was. The booking process was very confusing and had a 5-minute timeout even when I was actively entering data. I would get halfway through the reservation when a message popped up saying I had taken too long. I was then taken back to the beginning, having lost everything I had entered. I did it so many times that I got to know the pages and was able to rush through until my booking was made and my credit card was accepted. The next day, there was still no acknowledgement from Jet Airways, and when I contacted them, they said the payment had gone through, but something had gone wrong at their end, so the booking was not made. They said they would hold on to my money for a week before giving me a refund, and I could take it or leave it. No word of apology or request to try again, as they valued my business, just an email saying, "Bugger off and book with someone else so we can get back to our mobile phones." Okay, they weren't the actual words, but that was the clear message. Enough was enough. I went to British Airways and 15 minutes later my booking was complete, and for not that much extra. One of my greatest travel fears was being late for a flight, especially when all our reservations were made in advance, so missing a flight would have a knock-on effect. I liked to get to an airport 3 hours early, but even then, a couple of times it was touch and go because of bad traffic on the M25. And with that in mind, we decided to spend the night before our flight at the Premier Inn Hotel at Heathrow. And what a joy it was not to have to worry about last-minute panics or traffic, and at only £45, it was great value. My sat-nav was determined to take us via Swaziland, but we got there in the end. It wasn't until I took our luggage from the car that I realized that one of the wheels had fallen off my suitcase, so it looked like we had our first mishap on the 3-meter journey from the house to the car. At the hotel check-in, I was surprised to see a row of machines where we simply entered our name and credit card and out popped our room key. No more waiting in line to check in, irritated that there were not enough staff on duty. Being concerned about lugging a 3-wheeled suitcase around India for 4 weeks, we went to the airport terminal that was connected to the hotel, although quite a long walk. As expected, Heathrow Terminal was not the place to buy a bargain suitcase as they started at £200. Maybe India would be a better place to look. The flight was just over 7 hours, which surprised me as India sounds so far away. On long-haul flights, I always pay extra to get a 2-seater at the back, so it was annoying to find the flight half empty. It turned out that 7 Air India flights from New York had been cancelled because of snow, and people from those flights were supposed to be on ours. We moved from our paid seats and occupied a 3-seater that was free. We landed in New Delhi at 1:30 a.m., and I was surprised at the temperature. I had always thought India had 2 temperatures, hot and unbearably hot. I discovered there was a third temperature, bloody cold. At 7 degrees, it was the same temperature as the UK. I had read that it could be cold at night, but I had this illogical idea that 7 degrees in India wasn't the same as 7 degrees in England. That there was some kind of magical phenomenon that made 7 degrees in India feel like 20 degrees. I was a little disappointed as heat was at the top of my list of holiday requirements. We knew it would be warmer during the day, and the further south we went, the hotter it would get, but for now, we hadn't brought enough warm clothing. I was dreading passport control as I had read several horror stories of long queues and bureaucracy, but there was a separate section for people with e-visas, so we were through in 20 minutes. We exchanged some money and bought SIM cards for our phones, and our driver was waiting for us on arrival, so all went very smoothly. We had booked a room at the Tatvamasi homestay in South Delhi because it had a perfect review score and the price was very reasonable. Despite it being 2:30 a.m., the owner was there to welcome us and even offered to drive us to the local 24-hour store if we were hungry. Federica had planned for this and bought a sandwich at Heathrow, so it wasn't needed, and all we wanted to do was go to bed. With such a high review score and us booking the deluxe room, I was surprised to find our room was very shabby, with a small bar heater in the corner and no heater in the bathroom or kitchen area. As so often happened with Booking.com, if the owner was very friendly, people didn't have the heart to give them a bad review, which was obviously the case at that homestay. We were 5 hours ahead of GMT, so although we were shattered, it was still only 9:30 for us, which was an unheard-of time for us to go to bed, but our bodies gave us little choice. I was concerned that we might lie in bed too long the next morning, which would make it difficult to adjust to local time, but I needn't have worried. The possibility of sleeping late in even the quietest suburb of Delhi was almost non-existent. Firstly, I was woken at 4 a.m. by a man walking slowly along the street, blowing a whistle and tapping a stick on the floor. I couldn't imagine why he would be doing such a thing, but fortunately, I soon got back to sleep. Then, at dawn, a pigeon landed on the outside of our air conditioning unit and started cooing loudly with the occasional wing fluttering just in case we managed to drop off. Then the car horn started, followed by street vendors competing with each other over who could shout the loudest. Despite all this, we slept till around 9 a.m., which was around the time we wanted to get up anyway. The room was very cold and the bathroom colder, but we were in good spirits and always knew that in India we would have to expect the unexpected. I went onto the balcony, and the first thing I saw was a woodpecker in the tree a few yards from us. The owner showed us around the local hotspots and told us what restaurants to go to or avoid, and couldn't do enough to welcome us. He effectively told us that he knew his homestay was not great, which was why he was there to do everything possible for his guests. A lot of people were nervous about being in India for the first time, so that kind of guidance was invaluable. We had breakfast with him and tried some local dishes, which were very tasty, although more like a light lunch. I asked him why a man was walking around in the middle of the night, blowing a whistle and tapping a stick. I was surprised to learn that it was to scare off thieves and other undesirables. It was a relief to know we could sleep safely in our bed at night, knowing a man was patrolling the streets armed to the teeth with a whistle and a stick. I don't mean the kind of stick that was used in martial arts, which could be a formidable weapon unless someone was shooting at you. Judging by the hollow sound that the stick made, it was thin bamboo, and the most damage it could have inflicted was to mess up someone's hairdo. Later, we went to the Lotus Temple, which was a place of worship for the interesting Baha'i religion. Interesting because the basis of it was that all religions should be embraced as they are part of the same common humanity, where we are all supposed to be good to each other. You wouldn't think anyone could argue with that. I expect the founder believed it right up until the day he was murdered by someone of another faith.
Stop fighting on the wall. It ain't no use at all. Stop fighting on the wall. You're both gonna fall. There's no place for love with anger in your heart. Stop fighting on the wall. That's a good place to start.
It looked very impressive from the outside, and as we assumed the long queue was to go inside the temple, we joined it. We were used to taking our shoes off before entering temples, but we were a long way from the entrance when they handed us bags to put our shoes in and insisted that we stand on the cold stone floor in socks. The queue moved quickly, but the further we went, the more we saw it twisting and turning, so it was much longer than we first thought. It also seemed to go along the outside of the temple walls, which were glass, so it looked like all we were doing was queuing to look through the window into the temple. With that prospect in mind, and with our feet being so cold, we put our shoes on and abandoned the queue. Further on, we saw that people did eventually go into the temple, but from what we could see, it was just a large open space, so we didn't miss much. After a delicious Nepalese meal that night, we went to bed shattered as we had lost half a night's sleep due to the time difference. It took me my customary 30 seconds to fall asleep, but I woke up at 2 a.m., wide awake. On the rare occasion that happened at home, I would sit in the living room with a glass of port and read for 20 minutes, which always made me sleepy, but I couldn't do that there. I did eventually drop off and realized how lucky I was to sleep so well in general. That morning, we were up bright and early to do a city walking tour. I wanted to use Uber to get to the meeting place, but Federika wanted the metro experience. The homestay owner told us that being Sunday, the station would be nearly empty, and I suppose to Indian standards it was, but there were still long queues, and we didn't know which queue to join for a day ticket. We joined the wrong queue, but as we were late, we just took the basic ticket and made our way to the platform. We didn't get far before we were stopped at a security area where we had to put our bags on a conveyor belt. There were lots of people waiting to get through the metal detector, so Federika's handbag was on the other side long before us. The system might have been secure for finding people with guns and bombs, but hopelessly insecure for people's personal belongings. Federika was panicking that anyone could have walked off with her bag, but to her great relief, it was there waiting for her. There were only 2 directions of travel, so although it was impossible to take the wrong train, we did manage to take it going in the wrong direction. It was a while before we realized our mistake, as the stations had no names and the little lights on the train telling you which station we were stopping at weren't working. We arrived half an hour late and had arranged to meet our small group at the station exit, as it was on the route of the walking tour. There were 2 English couples and 2 young American girls, so it was a nice, friendly group. The area was very busy, so we had our first taste of walking through the streets of India, where there were no pavements. We had to walk on the side of the road and just hope that the countless tuk-tuks and scooters saw us in time. There were lots of holes in the roads and pavements, so I was constantly turning my ankle, but my reflexes were still fast enough to recover without injury. The noise was horrendous as everyone drove with their hand continuously on their horns. On the back of a lot of vehicles it said, "Horn please," which seemed a strange instruction as it was not much of a warning if everyone did it non-stop. We stopped at a little street vendor who was selling little fluffy things that were made from the foam of boiled milk. It tasted just like eating sugar, so none of us were impressed, but the locals seemed to like them. Next, we stopped for a breakfast of light Indian food, including little bread things called puris and some different vegetarian masalas. It was good, although one of the dishes was unbearably hot for me, and even Federika struggled with it. We walked through the fascinating side streets in places we would never have dreamt of going by ourselves. We climbed some very narrow stairs until we got to the roof of a large, square complex of very old and tatty buildings. It was the luxurious home of a wealthy family decades earlier, but was now a collection of slums. In common with the streets, there was rubbish everywhere. It was Sunday, which must have been bath day, as on most of the rooftops there were Indians stripped to their underpants, scooping water from a large bucket and throwing it over themselves. On one rooftop, there were 2 kids making whistling noises and waving sticks with flocks of pigeons circling around them. It was a sport where each contestant had their own flock of pigeons, and the aim was to entice pigeons from other flocks. Whoever ended up with the most pigeons was the winner. Sunday also seemed to be shaving day, as there were a lot of men sitting on boxes in the street, being shaved by a man wielding a cutthroat razor. I assumed that no one in India knew the story of Sweeney Todd. There was rubbish and filth everywhere, and at one place, while the guide was talking to us, I looked down and saw a dead rat. By the size of it, I think it might have died of overeating. We had to climb over a mountain of rubbish to get to one flight of stairs. I suppose if you live in that kind of environment, you end up becoming oblivious to it. We finished the tour by stopping at the house of the owner of the tour company. It was a Havali, an old house once owned by a noble. It had fallen into disrepair, and so the owner spent a fortune on renovating it to the highest standard. He showed us around, and each room was filled with valuable antiques and furniture. We were led to a large dining room table and served lunch prepared by his wife. It was excellent and came as a surprise, as we had no idea it was part of the deal. I suppose by Indian standards, $50 each wasn't a cheap tour, but it was a thoroughly enjoyable morning and worth every penny. We then took a tuk-tuk to the Red Fort, which was once the residence of the reigning Mughals of the time. It had been quite cold all morning, but by now it was warm enough to make a pleasant temperature. As always happens at tourist attractions, someone approached us to be our guide, which we were happy to accept, especially when his fee was only £3.50. I couldn't believe the number of people queuing, and not only was the line at least half a kilometre long, but there were 2 of them. Our guide advised us to buy a foreigner ticket, which entitled us to jump the queue, and although it was 10 times the price of tickets for Indians, it was still very cheap. When we got near the entrance, both queues merged into one as they approached a single metal detector. Only one person at a time was let through, so people were literally fighting to get to the front while security guards struggled to keep order. I had never seen anything like it, and the lack of concern by the authorities for the people it served defied belief. What possible excuse could there be for not having more metal detectors to prevent people from having to wait for so long in queues? I didn't feel comfortable about jumping the queue just because we paid more than the locals, but it was either that or abandoning the visit. We bought tickets and followed our guide, who shouted at everyone and made a path for us, although there was still a lot of jostling. It was a relief to get to the other side and start the tour, but when I felt in my pocket I realized my mobile phone was gone. I had always been very security conscious and constantly checked that everything was in place, as well as securing my wallet to my trousers with a leather strap. I was mortified, as my phone was fine-tuned, so it contained absolutely everything we needed for the trip. We couldn't travel without phones, if for no other reason than Federika and I were constantly losing each other. On one occasion, before the days of mobile phones, I waited half an hour outside a cafe for her, only to find that she was waiting inside. The guide advised us to go to the police, but I knew it would be a waste of time. The last thing I wanted was to spend the afternoon filling in forms that I was sure would end up in the wastebasket the minute we left the building. We continued the tour, but not a single word entered my brain while I was considering what security steps I needed to take to secure my stolen phone. It was password protected, so in theory, there was no danger, but I was happy to get back to the hotel, where I used my laptop to remove all my credit cards and sensitive data and wipe the phone remotely. With a mobile phone being essential to me, I wanted to put the whole thing behind me so I could wake up in the morning without it hanging over my head. The owner of the homestay took me from shop to shop and couldn't do enough to help. When I told him I had to have an iPhone, he said it would be hard to find a second-hand iPhone, And why didn't I buy an Android phone like Samsung? In common with most iPhone users, I had always looked down on Android from a great height, so the thought of switching was unthinkable. After visiting 6 shops, I knew I had no choice but to buy a cheap Samsung until I got back to the UK. What a revelation that was. Having my iPhone stolen was one of the best things that ever happened to me. The more I used the £60 Samsung, the more surprised I was to discover how much better it was than my £600 iPhone. Not that I would ever have paid so much for a phone, as I always bought them second-hand. Next morning I woke up with the distressing incident behind me and could continue to enjoy the holiday. First stop was Qutb Minar, a 73-metre tower built to celebrate Muslim dominance after the defeat of Delhi's last Hindu ruler. I can't say I am heavily into towers, but it was a pleasant morning walking around the grounds, and a security guard latched onto us to show us all the best places to take novelty photos. We were also approached by a group of young lads who were thrilled to have their photo taken with us, which I have to say was quite thrilling for me as well. Having spent most of my life seeking fame, I knew that was the closest I would ever get. Getting around Delhi was easy, as the homestay owner advised us to use Uber rather than tuk-tuks. We liked using tuk-tuks, but it was such a pain going through the bargaining and being taken to places we didn't want to go, which never happened with Uber drivers. After lunch, we went to Lodi Garden, which was a very welcome haven compared to the craziness of the streets. By now, all the places we had visited had merged into one in my head, and although it was all very pleasant, I was more interested in the exotic birds than the gardens. When it was time to return to the hotel, we thought we would take a tuk-tuk as there were dozens of them waiting outside. The first driver quoted an absurd amount, but we eventually agreed on what was only a minor rip-off. We were sitting in his tuk-tuk waiting to leave when he asked if he could make a stop at a government store where we could buy gemstones at very special prices. We had been through all this before, so we said no, but he insisted because he would get 100 rupees from the shop owner. The conversation got quite heated, so we got out the tuk-tuk and called an Uber. The road was chaotic, so the Uber we booked couldn't find us. We returned to the tuk-tuks, but no one was prepared to take us unless we stopped off at a store first. So it was back to Uber, but we waited in a more accessible place, and this time he found us. What an unpleasant experience it was, and how self-destructive was the behaviour of the tuk-tuk drivers in the face of competition from a service that offered a fixed fare without any haggling. Despite the unpleasant experiences, the chaos and the filth, we enjoyed our stay in Delhi, and I had never been anywhere with such a sense of adventure. We booked a driver to take us to Agra to see the Taj Mahal and then on to Jaipur. He picked us up at 6 a.m, as it was going to be a long day. We were concerned about the journey, as someone told us they had been the day before, and it was very scary because there was thick fog all the way. There were a few fog patches, but nothing to worry about. We had a good car and driver, so it was a very pleasant journey apart from the cup of tea he insisted we drank at a roadside stall. It must have contained 2 kilos of sugar and cinnamon. After a 3-hour drive, we reached Agra. We met up with our guide and started with a coffee and a muffin at Costa Coffee. Cars were not allowed near the Taj Mahal, so the driver dropped us off a few kilometres away where we could take a tuk-tuk. Considering we were heading to one of the great wonders of the world, I was surprised at how tatty the surrounding villages were. We had seen the occasional cow in Delhi, but around Agra they were everywhere, as well as wild pigs and goats strolling around like they owned the place, which I suppose they do. Having witnessed the appalling crowds going to the Red Fort, I was concerned that it would be even worse for such a famous tourist attraction, but there was hardly anyone there, so we were able to walk straight in. We passed a couple of derelict buildings, and everything was still looking shabby when we turned a corner, and there it was, the Taj Mahal. I had been lucky to have seen so many wonderful places in my life, but nothing compared to my first sight of the Taj Mahal. Maybe it was the sudden impact of seeing it after passing through the shabby surroundings. Maybe it was because I had seen so many photos of it since childhood, and there it was in real life. Maybe it was even that my great-grandfather was married there in 1847 when he was stationed in Bengal with the British Army, and there was some kind of psychic connection. Whatever it was, it had an almost physical impact on me. The Taj Mahal was commissioned in 1632 by the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan to house the tomb of his favourite wife, Mumtaz Mahal. Our guide was very good and explained that what looked like a mosaic was in fact precious gems that were inlaid with great skill into the marble. He told us that when the building was finished, the emperor ordered that all the workers be killed, so nothing that magnificent could ever be built again. It sounded a tiny bit excessive to me, but I later found out that it was just a myth made up to make tours more interesting. There was a lot of building going on at that time, and highly skilled workers were far too valuable to be executed. We went inside, but there wasn't much to see as the original tomb was on the floor below us. But it was still an extraordinary experience. After the tour, our driver took us to the factory where descendants of the Taj Mahal's original workers still made amazing works of art using the same method as was used on the Taj Mahal. At the entrance to the factory, a man was seated at a primitive kind of grindstone powered by a string attached to a stick, while his other hand ground tiny bits of glass and gemstones. The pieces were far too intricate to be ground by electric tools. Another man carved out the shapes in white marble, ready to fit into whatever was being made. We were taken into their showroom and given our own personal assistant, and for once it was something we wanted to do. There were finished pieces everywhere, which ranged from large tables costing tens of thousands of pounds to small articles to be used as ornaments. They were all true works of art. They were sold according to the number of pieces that were used. We never normally get sucked into buying these expensive things, but they were so special that we settled on a small mosaic containing nearly 500 pieces. It was going to be a pain carrying it around for the rest of the holiday, but what a lovely souvenir of such a special day.
It's not easy writing love songs without words that you've used before. It's not easy writing love songs when you finally know for sure. I've been sitting here for hours trying to think of something new, but three simple words keep coming back. Three simple words keep coming back. I love you.
After lunch, we continued on our journey with a 5-hour drive to Jaipur. A few years earlier, I had bought a book entitled 501 Great Places to Stay. I often looked through it in awe, but most places were either too inaccessible or prohibitively expensive. Federika was looking through the book and was surprised to find the Tree of Life in Jaipur, which was expensive for India but still the same price as a moderate hotel in Europe, and for a few quid extra, we could have our own private swimming pool. I hadn't realized at the time of booking that the price quoted didn't include a 30% too late to back out now tax, but we would still have booked it anyway. A few kilometers from the hotel, the road started to shrink until it became just sand, and it looked at times like we were going to get stuck as the wheels started spinning. The driver did a good job, and with great relief, it wasn't long before we turned into the hotel driveway. When we got out of the car, I was surprised at how cold it was. At 4 degrees, it was colder than England. We were greeted by the manager, who showed us into a little room to do the paperwork and then took us to our private villa. They say that one of the many great things about India is that you can treat yourself to luxuries that you could not normally afford. In some countries, we would have paid thousands of pounds a night to stay in a place like that. There was a huge living room with a sofa and a large dining table and chairs. A doorway led to the large garden, complete with a swimming pool, sun loungers, showers, a hot tub and even 2 massage tables. The bedroom was equally big, with the bed in the middle of the room and a large dome built into the ceiling, which was backlit with red lighting. Behind the bed was a nice little writing desk. At the far end was a walk-in wardrobe and then a bathroom, which was bigger than most hotel rooms we have stayed in. It was amazing and fortunately had heaters in every room, so the place soon warmed up. After 3 hectic days in Delhi, it was just what we needed. Our first day in Jaipur was designated a chill-out day. Breakfast was an extensive menu, plus anything that wasn't on the menu. The dining room was quite cold, but acceptable. After breakfast, we took a walk around the large grounds. There were 14 villas in total, and only 9 of them were occupied, so we didn't see many other guests around the place. Villas were spaced well apart with hedges in between, and the gardens were well maintained with little religious statues everywhere. In front of the reception was a lily pond, and every time we went past it, we saw my favourite bird, the kingfisher. There was a large infinity pool, but in common with our own pool, it was far too cold to swim. They gave the option of a romantic dinner with a table on a platform in the middle of the pool, surrounded by hundreds of candles, for a mere £200. One night, we saw a couple having dinner there, and I would have been tempted to take up the offer, but it was freezing, and I didn't see any kind of heating. We booked a driver through the hotel for the next day, who didn't speak a word of English, but the hotel manager told him what we wanted to see, so we assumed there would be no problems. We knew the hotel was a long way from town, but hadn't realized just how far, and because of the heavy traffic, it took nearly an hour. First stop was the enormous amber palace built on top of a hill. When we reached the village beneath the palace, our driver had been instructed to get us a good guide, and we had assumed that, as the driver took people there regularly, he must have known the guides personally. He stopped the car and asked a stranger where we could find an English-speaking guide, and he pointed to some men sitting chatting on a wall. One of the men came over and sat in our car, and he explained he was to be our guide. In every tourist destination we had ever been to, tourists were warned not to accept the services of unofficial guides. This man assured us that he was an official guide, and when I asked to see his license, he handed me a document. He claimed it was his license, but it was obviously an ID card. I wasn't happy, but Federika said she wasn't bothered, and as we had had plenty of official guides who were terrible, we accepted it. He turned out to be excellent. During the morning we spent at the palace, I didn't see a single official guide or any police checking credentials, so it seemed that the authorities were insisting that tourists use guides that didn't exist. During our coffee break, our guide explained how there were 21 members of his family, all living in the same big house, and they all got along very well. In the old days, the women shared a kitchen, but his grandfather had the foresight to know that future generations would want their own space. So when a child got married, he built an extension with everything the newlyweds needed. At the end of the tour, he left us at the entrance to a shop where a man was demonstrating block printing. The demonstration lasted 30 seconds, and then we were shuffled into the shop, where we were pressured into buying pashmina scarves. Some of the scarves cost around £250 each, and we were assured theirs were the cheapest in India. But as this was our first shop, and we were always nervous about the shops that guides took us to, Federika didn't buy anything. After lunch, we went to another tourist destination, but by the end of the day, I had forgotten what it was, as by now most sites were blending into one another. More to my taste was Mansagar Lake, where we saw a very busy and enticing promenade, so we asked the driver to stop so we could walk around and soak up the happy atmosphere of Indian families. There was a small crowd standing around someone taking photos, and the next thing I knew, someone was wrapping a turban around my head, arming me with a curly sword and fitting me with baggy trousers and a matching jacket. Federika had received a similar treatment, and we were directed to the front of the lake, where photos were taken of us dressed in the Rajasthan national costume. They printed a dozen photos and showed them to us, asking how many we wanted. They were all very good, so they weren't happy when we only bought one, but how many photos do you need of the same thing? Finally, our driver was meant to take us to a museum of block printing called Anarchy, but he didn't seem to have a clue where it was. We drove around with him, stopping and asking people for directions, until we arrived at a place which was a shop called Anochi. It was connected to the museum, but not the museum itself, which was in another part of town. It was all very confusing, but Federica liked the shop, so the visit wasn't wasted. Next day, the hotel booked us another driver, and he spoke very good English, which was a relief. He took us to the Anochi Museum of Block Printing, which turned out to be right next to the Amber Palace, where we were the day before. A man was sitting on the floor carving out wooden blocks used for printing, and he made a little one for us to take home. The main reason for our visit was to look at the printing process, but it was a Friday, and as all the workers were Muslim, so they had gone to prayer. Federica was keen to buy some pashmina scarves, and as we trusted this driver, we let him take us to a shop that sold an amazing variety at what seemed like good prices. As soon as the sales assistants saw we were interested, they started pulling dozens of scarves from the shelves and throwing them on the counter, making it harder to walk away without buying one. Federica managed to find a few she liked, so she was happy to buy them. On our way to the next stop, the chatty driver showed us a picture of his two sons. Yes, he was still driving, and explained how most marriages in India were arranged and that 80% of them were successful. As long as the people were given a choice, it always seemed a good idea to me. Parents asked around their large community for a suitable partner for their children, so the community in effect became a non-profit-making dating agency. It was daft that our way was to go about our daily lives and hope we bumped into the person we would spend the rest of our lives with. If the person we bumped into turned out to be from a long line of axe murderers, we wouldn't find out until it was too late, but at least we would know that our meeting was romantic. What surprised me about our driver was that he had told his father that he didn't need to see the bride before the marriage, and he would accept whoever his father had chosen. I just hope his bride was given the same choice. The driver took us to the centre of town to have lunch in the well-known LM restaurant, and despite being a large restaurant, there was a waiting list. The queuing area was packed solid and quite unpleasant, but we didn't have to wait long. Outside the temperature was a pleasant 28 degrees, so I was taken aback when we sat down to find the air conditioning had reduced the temperature down to near freezing point. We were shown to a table, and while I could put up with the noise from so many diners talking at the same time, I wasn't so sure I would survive the Arctic conditions. We were both tired and hungry, and the thought of hunting around for somewhere else to eat in the chaotic street outside was unthinkable. I put on a jumper and my woolly hat and sat there looking ridiculous in a restaurant full of people in shirt sleeves. I didn't know if one of the waiters saw me and took pity, but it wasn't long before they must have turned the air conditioning off, and what a relief it was to get back to a normal temperature. It was a strange menu. I had no idea what I ordered, but it was good and contained potatoes and pasta with a thick layer of grated cheese grilled on top. Crunchy grilled cheese makes everything taste good. The rest of the afternoon was spent looking around the shops with the constant irritation of shopkeepers pestering us to buy from them. We were happy to find an off-road area that was run by the government, where all the stall owners were much less aggressive, which made us more inclined to buy stuff. On the day we left Jaipur, it was a special holiday where the main activity was kite flying, and as we were driving to the airport, there were thousands of people of all ages flying very basic kites. The kids became so engrossed in it that sometimes they went dashing into the busy road and nearly got hit by cars. All along the road, there were poles supporting cables that were covered with kites that had got caught up in them. I felt sorry for the kids, who were mostly very poor and could probably only afford one cheap kite a year, only to fly it straight into some cables. I got to thinking that maybe I grew up poorer than I thought. When I was very young, I took one of my mum's cotton reels and tied a few sheets of toilet paper to it. I let off a lot of cotton and went running down the street trying to get some lift like I had seen people do with real kites. It wasn't a great success. I held the end of the cotton and threw the reel over a telephone cable so it landed by my feet, where my toilet paper kite was waiting patiently. The idea was that I would run down the street holding the cotton, and the kite would go up to the cable, and once airborne, it would soar off into the sky. It wasn't a great success. The kite got stuck in the cable, and the tangled cotton stayed there for weeks afterwards. Thank you for listening to Nemo James Travel Diaries. Photos and videos of my adventures, together with my music and the books I have published, can be found on my website www.nemojames.com/travels. You will also find details of my mobile phone app, Wordbanker, which is designed to help you build a foreign language vocabulary. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please click the subscribe button and share it with your friends. It will mean a lot to me. In the next episode, we will be traveling to India, Udaipur, Mumbai and Goa.
Do you like the songs I've sung to you? Do you like the time that we've been through? Do you like my music? Do you like to sing along? Yes, we like the songs that you have sung. We like the friends that we've become. We like your music. We like your music. We like your music and the words of your song.